UnCanadian by B Constant. Undertones. His face was hidden in shadow, his expression unreadable. Once I had found this seductive, mysterious even, but now, it left me questioning everything. My anxiety squeezed the breath from my chest as I wrung my hands. I hated not knowing what he was thinking. The uncertainty left me unbalanced. His fragile, unpredictable moods dictated my life. I chose my words with the precision of diffusing a bomb, knowing one misjudged tone could ignite an emotional outburst. I clung to the delusion that if I could understand him, I might anticipate his whims and control the uncontrollable. I searched for hidden meanings in his every glance and tilt of his head, as if his silence held the answers I needed. I couldn't predict his moods, not even today, our ultrasound appointment. This moment would finally make our baby real, not just a distant dream, but something tangible. I hadn't told James yet. I wanted it to be a surprise, to catch that look on his face when he saw our baby on the screen. Wouldn't this be the moment he woke up and saw a future waiting to be built together? I imagined it clearly, his hand on mine as we stared at the screen, his face softening with awe, his voice cracking as he whispered, "We're going to be parents." We'd start planning, baby clothes, cribs, a nursery. He'd become the father I always believed he could be. But my dream wasn't reality. The vision of our future faded, exposing cracks I'd been desperate to ignore. How could I cling to hope when the man I loved treated both music and me with such disregard? Instead, I felt alone, torn between fluttering butterflies and a sinking weight in my chest. If this moment couldn't move him, what could? Why was James like this? Then, as my level of denial began to lower, I confronted a bitter reality. The James I thought I knew didn't exist. He was a fraud, a figment of my imagination I clung to desperately. I had constructed this illusion to soothe myself amid his neglect and the crushing loneliness it caused. This realization was devastating. I had wasted so much time and energy on a dream that could never be. What was I holding on to? Why had I fought so hard for nothing? Have you ever watched someone mistreat something you love? That's what James was doing to me. He treated music like mere sound when it was divinity, celestial, sacred. His fingers moved over the keys, not with graceful precision, but with hurried, clumsy motions. He didn't glance at the sheet music. He insisted he had memorized every note and nuance. The sound that reached my ears betrayed him. Notes stumbled and staggered, an incoherent mess of misplaced chords and uneven rhythms. Frustration simmered beneath the surface. James didn't want to be shaped. He flaunted his perfection like a birthright, yet I could see the flaws in every note, every slouch, every careless touch. I could have helped him, crafted him into something extraordinary. If only he'd let me. If only he'd listened. My advice, my expertise, it meant nothing to him. I felt powerless as he stumbled through the piece, each misplaced note grating against the silence. I'd grade him a C, passable. His level of ego suggested he was an A+, but his attitude didn't match his talent. I could see that now, in this moment when I stopped listening with my heart and let my analytical brain take over. As a piano teacher, I had trained myself to see every flaw with unrelenting clarity, a skill I could never turn off. I now turned that gaze on James, not as the man I loved, but as the subject of my scrutiny. What I saw left me cold. I had learned to correct errors the moment they appeared. Precision was everything. It defined me. I was the one who shaped imperfection into brilliance. My students trusted me for that. But as I studied James, I realized this was no fleeting error to fix. This was something ingrained, far beyond my reach. There he was, slumped over the piano. Slouching wasn't just a casual fault, it was an insult to the instrument and the discipline. He hadn't earned the right to treat music like a tool he could bend to his will and discard. He played like a lazy man, as if music were a convenience, not a calling. It felt wrong, like defiling something holy. Music chooses you. It demands devotion, and the more you give, the more it becomes part of your soul. But James? He treated the sacred as mundane, the piano as just another piece of furniture, not the beating heart of everything. How could someone who claimed to love music disrespect it so completely? His fingers crashed down on the keys, not with grace, but with force, a controlled violence that made the piano tremble. Each note struck like a blow, deliberate and punishing, resonating through the room as if the walls were flinching. The tension rippled down his arms, feeding into the ferocity of his playing. His face remained unreadable, shrouded in shadow, but his hands told the story he wouldn't. They struck the keys with an intensity bordering on rage, each movement sharp and calculated. This wasn't music. It was a warning, a challenge. My throat tightened with each pounding chord. The melody was fractured, chaotic, and wrong. It wasn't a performance. It was a declaration of power, an audible reminder of who controlled the space, the silence, the very air I breathed. James wasn't just playing the piano, he was weaponizing it. The sound grew louder, relentless, each note slamming into me like an accusation. I felt it vibrating in my chest, a visceral assault that left no room for thought, no space to breathe. Was there a pattern? A hidden meaning? His hands moved too quickly, too aggressively, as if mocking my attempts to understand. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His presence was all-encompassing, the weight of his fury pressing down on me. I wanted to flee, to escape the overwhelming noise and suffocating tension, but I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, rooted to the spot as if I were tied to the chair. This wasn't about Beethoven. This was about me. About us. Every slam of his hands posed a question he wouldn't ask aloud, a challenge I wasn't brave enough to answer. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Then, something shifted. Was his clumsiness genuine or deliberate? He was speaking in a language only he could comprehend. This wasn't the music I recognized. It was fragmented and wrong, yet it carried a raw intensity that stole my breath. The sound became relentless, a pounding, an auditory assault that bordered on torture. Each note landed like a furious accusation. His technically proficient playing was eclipsed by the emotional rage driving it, leaving me feeling exposed and unsafe. Was this a conversation? Was he trying to tell me something? Each clipped note tore through the air like a reprimand, scolding me with unrelenting force. My pulse quickened, caught between confusion and a grim clarity. I couldn't look away. Each note demanded my attention, pulling me deeper into his chaotic world. How could so much hatred be contained in one man? His unreadable face loomed, and the chaotic assault on the piano struck me as a violent desecration. Was he trying to redefine Beethoven? Dictate the genius of music itself? But in that moment, I realized I was the only victim here. But this was a familiar cycle, one I had navigated before. Meetings, job opportunities, always dismissed by James, who felt they were beneath him, leaving me feeling powerless and frustrated. How many moments like this had I ignored? How many times had I seen the cracks, only to convince myself they weren't there? I told myself I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into things. We'd put in so much time, so much effort. I couldn't give up now. Any day now, things would fall into place. Stop it, Casey. Just stop. You're doing it again, twisting reality into something manageable, picking apart the pieces of a puzzle that refuses to fit. You promised you'd stop blaming yourself, stop pretending everything was fine, so why can't you let it go? Why are you back here again? But even as I tried to silence those thoughts, my eyes betrayed me, drawn back to him. That pull, familiar, maddening, dragged me in once more. Every move he made, every silence he kept, I dissected, searching, hoping, telling myself this time I'd find what I was looking for. Stop it, Casey. Just stop. There was no coaxing, begging, or pleading. He just stopped, suddenly and without reason. His face was still in shadow, leaving me with no explanation. I couldn't wrap my head around this shift. He didn't turn around or say a word. The music didn't end gently. It cut off, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. It felt jarring, like a rude interruption. James never did that, not unless I coaxed him. But this time it was different. This time he had stopped on his own. My breath hitched as quiet filled the room, unexpected and sharp. I should have been focused on James, but I'd let my mind drift, distracted and unprepared. This was my chance to speak, to break through the tension, and I was blowing it. If I said the right thing, maybe he'd hear me. Maybe he'd finally let me in. I didn't want to chase him anymore. I needed to stop pretending I had control, but my words tangled in my throat, refusing to surface. I couldn't even face him. All I could do was stare into the oppressive silence, feeling my heart pound in the void he'd left behind. Do you believe me? Or are you judging me, doubting me? I don't even know if I believe myself anymore, but I'm begging you, don't turn away. I need someone who can truly see me, someone who might understand what I'm going through. Join me for Undertones Part 2. Like, subscribe and share. Please tell me I'm not alone.